The following broadcast previously aired on KPFA. Please disregard any announcements or references to dates and events.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, KPFA. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to part 2 of the KPFA 75th birthday special broadcast. I am Miko Tolliver with more interviews from the amazing host and producers who've been a part of making KPFA the amazing organization that it's been for the last 75 years. For this hour, we will hear interviews from Kris Welch, Emiliano Echeverria, Nina Serrano, Luis Medina, and Brian Edwards-Tiekert. Let's start with an interview with Kris Welch, host of The Talkies.
Hi, this is Kris Welch, host of The Talkies, airing Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., wishing KPFA a very happy 75th birthday. I'm still older.
Your daughter is here and your grandkids. How has your family been a part of KPFA with you?
Oh boy, well, my daughter just about grew up here. She was here all the time because I'm a single mom, and she knows everybody here, and she knows how things work, and she knows what things don't work. And I remember when we shut the station down, or they did, and the police came. It was an interesting time. What year was that? That was really intense. Our manager then was Nicole Sawaya. They wanted her to do something that she was refusing to do, so they fired her. And that was the bottom line for us. They'd been pushing on many levels for a couple of months, and we went off. But before we went off, the police came. They barricaded the front door. The next day it was like boarded up. It was really horrible, and it was all on the radio. And in fact, it was Dennis Bernstein, who famously was on the air at the time and was arrested on air in the control room up in the newsroom. You know, people were arrested in the hallway. It was utter chaos. It was absolutely insane. And my daughter heard it on the radio and came running down here from our house, which was then a couple of blocks away. And she was just sobbing. You know, this was her place. This was her home, her radio station, that there would be police there and out in front of the station. Subsequently, there was it looked like a homeless encampment, but people put up tents and blockaded the street out in front to protect the station. There was a march later of like 20,000 people marching through Berkeley to protect the station and demand that these folks leave and leave us alone, which they eventually did. But of course, that's what my friend Michael meant when he says this is just sort of what happens, because people really, really care. They are really passionate about it.
They are really passionate. In fact, I was going to ask you, how do you feel the audience has received you? Because I know that, of course, you have the people who really, really love you. There are the people who really, really complain. How have you encountered criticism, feedback, support from the outside community for your shows?
Well, when I started, and I was just playing around, just being myself, and I was always amazed at the reaction, just sort of surprised, and still am to this day. And there are people who can't stand me, of course, and there's people that just love me, which I'm not trying to elicit anything. I was raised to be nice, and I try to be nice on the radio and to everybody. I'm not hardline, and some people are very critical of me for not being more in the face of whoever, but this is just not my style, not my strong point. And as a result of the job, especially the morning show, I was called to MC tons of things, comedy shows and anti-war demonstrations and anti-nuke things. And I'm always honored to be invited to be on a panel, or mostly MCing. I'm much more happy MCing than on a panel, facilitating other people to talk than talking myself. There were times, though, that it also got in my way. I had maybe a 10-year career as a singer during all this time, and also a 10-year, almost the same time, career as a working actress. And then you want to be seen for your talents and abilities, not like, oh, that's Kris Welch. You know what I mean? Not that I'm complaining. I remember on a Buddhist silent retreat, which I used to do a lot, and I haven't done since I had grandchildren. I would go off for a month at a time. A month silent retreat. It was just clear everything out and very, very peaceful, and just really focus my mind. And you have interviews, they call them, with the teacher once a week or something. In all this silence, this is the one time you get to talk. And I was talking about things that had come up and how I was thinking about KPFA and worrying about that, because you always are thinking about KPFA, blah, 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 blah. And the teacher, the woman, looked at me and said, well, you have to realize that there are people here who greatly envy you and your job and what you're doing. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, I'm very lucky. You're absolutely right. I appreciate that. But it's like no matter what you've got going on, there's always something to complain about. And I was in that mood. But mostly, it's such a blessing. It has been a total blessing.
Do you want to tell me how you became a journalist or a radio person?
Well, I don't think of myself as a journalist. I sort of feel like Pippa Passes, you're sort of going through life and, oh, that's happening. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. I'm a performer, mostly. And I had been raised from very, very early on to perform. I started piano lessons when I was 3. And I love performing. My mother was an actress. I mean, she would have been an actress. She was more of a dancer than an actress, but she was a stay-at-home mom living in a small town in Illinois. And I'm so conscious of how your life when you're a young person and how it morphs into what it is in the middle and then where it goes. It's so interesting. It can be so different. It's not like this, just you're walking down the road and it all goes straight. There's no straight and there's no goal. You sort of bring this stuff along with you if you're lucky in your memory. Anyway, my mother and my father had trained to be an operatic baritone. And my mother was a crack secretary too, is how she paid the bills. And my father was working in the steel mills in Gary when they met and singing at various churches for money on the weekends. And she was in the alto section of the choir. And he was the soloist. And at any rate, he then got a master's degree from University of Chicago in business management. So he went from that to that. And the journey is always so interesting. People's journeys, that's what really, really interests me. No matter who they are or what they're doing now, whether they've written an incredible book about hunger or whether they're a journalist covering the war in Guatemala or whatever it is, it's just like, how did you get to that? Just like you're asking me, how did that happen? And I majored in English, dropped out of college after 2 years because my parents said, you know what, we have 3 more after you, and you don't look like you're very happy there. You're not making very good grades, number one. And I was like horrified. What else am I going to do? And so I got on the Greyhound bus and went to New York City and went to the American Academy of Dramatic Art. I went to acting school. And after that, did a lot of waitressing, and then decided that maybe I would go back and finish college after 2 or 3 years of waitressing. So I went back to Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and got my BA in English Lit, which was what I had the most credits in. And by that time, I had a job at Montgomery Ward writing the catalog, as I mentioned, in Chicago, and did a lot of theater in Chicago, lots and lots of wonderful theater. Did Blues for Mr. Charlie on the south side of Chicago with a very strong African-American audience, and I was one of the white, townspeople in that play, and it was sort of like, and the black folks in the cast sort of surrounded us when we left the theater, so we did lots of silly stuff too. The Ballad of Sneaky Fitch, that was a good one. Anyway, performing is really more than journalism, my thing. And the way I got into the journalism thing was that I was in Tehran and had to find work. And my boyfriend, it was all boys. There were no other women there. Lots of English-speaking boys from Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, Scotland. And my boyfriend was from England. They all were teaching English to the Iranian Air Force. And I assumed that I would get a job there too, but meanwhile they were on vacation, spring break or something, and I needed a job now. So I went to one of the 2 English language daily newspapers in Tehran. Lots of English speaking American oil interest there, so 2 English language dailies. And my job at the Tehran Journal was to edit 3 pages: the local sports page, an international news page, and the editorial page. You laid out the editorial page the day before the paper came out, and I would go through files and pick out things that had been written by other people. And there was currently an OPEC meeting happening, and Iran was very interested, I knew this, to be fully accepted into this group because Saudi Arabia and Iran were duking it out about who was going to be really leading this organization and saying what was going to happen with oil prices, etc. And the Saudi Arabian ambassador was visiting Iran, and Iran was going to be hosting this meeting. So I thought, okay, cool. I looked through the files and found this thing about Saudi Arabia. I laid it out, then the thing comes out, and then I come in 2 days later, and the editor said, "What did you put on the editorial page?" And it turns out, he said, "We are in big trouble, and you have to retract it immediately, and you have to replace it with something that says the opposite." Anyway, this was September 15th, 1969, yes. This is the one that got me fired. This piece right here. After Libya, another Arab king tightens his grip. And unfortunately, down in the fine print, it talks about rusty Quranic beards, and it talks about young lieutenants leading the way into the new future. And the Saudi Arabian government was not happy with this article, and nor was the Shah, who didn't want to have anybody talking about a king not being good. The Shah didn't like that. He's a king. And you don't want any tightening the grip, and we don't want young lieutenants that are taking over. It's like, no. We do not talk about that. It's like Russia saying, no, you don't talk about the war. So then I had to do this one, how progressive Saudi Arabia is going to the future. And it's like, oh my God. Here's the next day's paper. In fact, there's the Shah right there. And on that page that we have here, progressive leadership at work in Saudi Arabia. Yesterday we published an article on Saudi Arabia by Alan Bennett for those even remotely acquainted with that country. The article was considered as prejudiced and inaccurate. And then comes this article explaining everything and showing factories and stuff like that. Very progressive.
Wow.
Getting that article together was my last. I left the paper and never came back again. And meanwhile, the editor was taken away to a secret prison by Savak, which is the secret police in Iran, and they are no joke. And the publisher was also gone, which was very handy because the publisher was the son of Senator Massoudi, who was one of the opposition people to the Shah in the Senate, so that they could punish him via his son. Being the publisher of this paper was very handy. Then we had people in, trench coats and sunglasses hanging out at our apartment. And I was, at the time, sort of Wendy to the Lost Boys. I mentioned there was all these boys, and they came over for dinner every night. I fixed dinner on this hot plate. So here were people out on the streets in trench coats watching who was coming and going from our apartment. It was like, maybe I better eat someplace else for the next couple of days. Was very exciting, and I could not get another job. I found another job teaching English and went to the Labor Department to get my card, and they said, oh no, not you. And that's why I had to leave Iran, because I couldn't work. So a little too exciting. I lived in Tehran for a year and lived in Italy for about 2 years and worked on the Rome Daily American there. There they had me on they would not have moved me off the proofreader desk. They did finally, but it was very sexist. And that's when I got into feminism and Germaine Greer and the female eunuch, and I was known as the feminist on staff. And I would go in, why is Roman getting paid more than I am and we're doing the same job? Because he's a man. Yeah, blatantly. Because he's got more mouths to feed? No, he lives by himself. I, on the other hand, have a cat. So it just sort of builds and builds and builds, Especially when you start out naive and you start, wait a minute, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. That's not right. And if you're white and have been raised to, I went to college, the first one in my family to go to regular college and stay in the dorm and everything. My dad commuted. He'd already had a wife and 2 or 3 kids while he was getting his master's, while he had a job. So that's my journalism. Oh, and I also worked on the Livermore Independent newspaper here in the Bay Area. And again, that was from a boyfriend who had a job there. And somebody left for the summer to write a novel, and they needed somebody to fill in. So I was hired to fill in for him and wrote local stories. I'm a good writer. I can write. And I don't mind asking people questions. I'm very curious. So it sort of feeds in like that, but it's not like I have a drive to tell the story. It's not why I do it.
It seems like it just keeps finding you.
That's right. And that was my reference to Pippa Passes, sort of going through the world and things call you. It's not a bad way to do it, I don't think.
That was an interview with Kris Welch, host of The Talkies. And next up, we will hear from Emiliano Echeverria, host of Cuba Canta, 9 p.m., the last Saturday of the month, and KPFA's longest-running volunteer.
Hi, all KPFA listeners. Please join us in celebrating KPFA's 74th birthday special. As part of this special broadcast, we have reached out to those who have a long-time history with the station, be it as a host, a producer, a volunteer, or some other capacity. We are wanting to celebrate this occasion by hearing their stories and experiences and how they have affected and impacted KPFA's extensive history. Today here at KPFA Studio, I am very pleased to welcome Emiliano Echeverria. Emiliano has been involved and connected to KPFA for many, many years. In fact, more than half of the 74 years it's been around. I'm excited to hear about his long-running career with KPFA and his connection to the Bay Area music scene. Without further ado, welcome Emiliano, and thank you so very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Talk about how you've been involved with the station as a host, producer, whatever hat you've worn. And
let's start with my arrival here.
Okay.
Maybe that would help.
Sure.
When I arrived here, I started getting training, and I became a relief board operator. And they put me on Sunday afternoons, which was a very, very easy shift because you were doing the opera. So you only changed tapes or records once every half hour or so, or put a continuity in the middle of it. Didn't even talk. So that was fairly simple. And then I started getting assignments to do remotes and other things at the station. I got more and more involved. I learned more and more, started working with engineering and repairing microphone cables and stuff in the engineering shop. So that's how it starts. And I became pretty efficient at doing musical remotes. I worked a lot with Charles Emerkanian, who was music director here for many, many years, and became pretty proficient at what I did here. But I had an interruption happen for a few months because I was drafted. And I refused to be drafted, and I was sentenced to federal penitentiary. But the judge had a heart attack, and so they assigned me to another judge, and I was out in like 5 months. So I came back to KPFA, but I had a whole different focus by then. When you do time, you learn a lot of things, and I did, like anybody did. And I wanted to start being involved more with my community. And so a friend of mine, Raul Torres, and we set up a program called Reflexiones de la Raza. So we started doing bilingual programming here. It was the first community station in Northern California to do so. And we actually consulted several other stations on doing the same thing. And they did so in different ways, including KBBF in Santa Rosa was set up as a bilingual station. I was also a co-founder of the Third World Department, which was active in the 70s and the 80s at the station too. This didn't come without controversy, however, because there was a bit of an old guard at the station that was very hostile to change. And so there was years of conflict that happened over that, and I had to find myself stuck in the middle of a lot of that. And so, there was a lot of give and take on it over the years. But, in the end, that thing I feel is my greatest accomplishment here at KPFA is that KPFA has many people of color here now, many people of all types of persuasions here, which we did not have when I came here. So that's something I feel proud of having been a part of.
You got involved at some point with the Latin music programming, and the two shows that I'm familiar with, Con Sabor and Ritmo de las Americas. Are you still doing that? And
I did maybe one or two Ritmos de las Americas, but I was much more involved. I am still involved with Con Sabor. In fact, I have an installment will be on this coming Saturday as we record this. But I've been working with Luis Medina and Con Sabor, which it'll be 25 years in June. Okay. But going back to where it all goes back to the music programming, again, I was in the music department with under Charles Emerkanian, but after that, I helped set up a collective here called Comunicación Aztlán, and we were concentrating on Latino programming, both public affairs and cultural. And so we had a magazine show on the early part of Saturday called Reflexiones de la Raza, which we did music, a lot of live stuff. All those programs are at the Freedom Archives. They exist. Then we had another show called Como Mis Antepasados, which was on Saturday afternoons. And it was like an hour-long documentary about a specific country's liberation struggles and histories and stuff, like Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, Chile, different countries. And then we had then we started a program in late 1972. It was called Unidos, and I was co-producing that with the late Chata Gutierrez. And that show was a mixture of, are you ready for this? Rhythm and blues, country music, oldies, and Mexican music and salsa.
Wow.
So more and more the salsa took over. And so we began a series of programs with Unidos. And then later on, a show came in a few years after that called Ahora. And in 1986, Chuy Varela was co-directing the Latino programming at KPFA, and he invited me to do a segment of the Ahora program, which was like a weekly rotated program. 1 week, one person would be on, Luis Medina would be on 1 week, I'd be on another week, Chata would be on another week, and Jica Aguirre or Jose Ruiz would be on the other week. So that happened until 1995, and all that was taken off, and then Con Sabor ended up kind of being the surviving entity of that. Okay. And so Luis invited me in '98 to do his last Saturday of the month, because he would either do professional gigs or just want to be at home.
Okay.
And so I started doing them, and I've been doing those ever since.
What kind of imprint do you think you've left at the station? You know, what do you think?
Well, I think I may have already answered that. We have a Filipino American as our station manager. We have many people of color working within this station, many different capacities. That's, to me, what I consider my biggest contribution to the station was we had to fight for that. I never understood why in a liberal station that battle had to be waged, but it did. And it was something which I'll never understand it, because these were folks who superficially and, you know, the way they expressed themselves in public were as not just liberals, but extreme liberals, very liberal, almost utopia liberal. But yet there was that something that said that when the people of color came into the station, all the doors got locks on them with keys. All the doors had been opened before. And our office got no door at all. They took the door off our office. So strange things, strange things. And so it didn't help. But we pushed ahead because we knew what we wanted to do in the long run was good for the station, as well as what we were trying to do. Because the station sound, like I mentioned, the station sound in 1968 was very similar to 1949. It was going to have to be upgraded at some point and updated. And in the early 70s, there was a lot of experimentations that happened. Ours was not the only collective in the station. There was a women's collective, there was the Fruit Punch collective, early gay collective, different African American groups, 2 different Chinese groups. You know, that was something that I really wanted to see in the station, that the station represented the entire Bay Area, not just the educated liberals of the Bay Area, but so we would do programs. We'd go down and record school board meetings down in Union City, or go and record a Cinco de Mayo festival inside the walls of San Quentin.
Wow.
So we got around. One of our members is, we had 2 members of our group, the Alegria, Isabel and Andres Alegria. Their father was in Chile at the time of the coup in Chile, and he was a dear friend of Pablo Neruda. We had those kind of, all these interconnections, these different members of the group. Daniel Del Solar later became a manager at KALW. Andres Alegria became a freelance producer. Stuff shows up on Channel 4 a lot. One of our trainees, Eric Schilling, ended up as a producer for Gloria Stefan. So we did make an impact here. And we trained a lot of people. Yeah. And this was well before the apprenticeship program sort of institutionalized that. Again, we were doing that on the fly, training as we went along, making these programs. And we gained respect by many people within the station over time because of the discipline and the commitment that we used in making our programs. So that's what I consider.
Yeah.
You know, and so now, if someone who's a person of color walks into the station, people don't go running to hide or whatever. They, you know, come on in. You know, you're part of. You want to be part of KPFA? Great, come on in. We have a training class. You want to go to training class? We have apprenticeship. I hear the apprenticeships had stuff happen that's not good, but I hope that they can fix that, because after all, this is an educational institution, and part of our function is to educate people. And that was a function that I really enjoyed seeing happen here, was the training of young people.
Right. Using it as kind of a jumping off point to figure
Because,
out.
well, not only that, but also, I'm also a firm believer that management should in some ways come from within, because the culture of this place is so unique. There's no, I mean, you can go to all the public radio stations in this country, but this is not like them. You see, to me, this place is, because it's a prototype again. It's got that ability. What did Lou Hill say? In a crisis, grow. It has that ability to do that, and it's done that. Now, sometimes that growth hasn't been the best thing for it, but I think he meant not just physically grow. I think he meant grow in attitude, grow in concept, open your mind more.
Right.
Open your mind more. And that's what I think is the big contribution of KPFA. It opened up a lot of minds, starting with Alan Watts. You know, he did programs for years here at KPFA about opening the mind and stuff like that, and the different poets and literary figures that came here, the different political figures, community figures. That was happening when I came here. But what I think the contribution to people that I worked with here was, we were bringing people in from the Western Addition. We were bringing people in from East Oakland. We were bringing people in from Richmond, and giving them the experience of learning how radio worked and seeing if they wanted to pursue that as a career or to volunteer here or whatever.
Right.
You see, that's my contribution. And also hopefully a spirit of keep it moving. Don't give up. See, that was the thing that was amazing about KPFA, was that was what was the thing about Lou Hill, was he wasn't just a talker. He didn't just theorize. There's a book that he did called Voluntary Listener Sponsorship. He lays it all out, what he was trying to do. But he also was a motivator. He could get people to do things and to make this place happen. This is its third home. It's been it's been relocated twice. It was right around the corner on University Avenue, 2054 University Avenue on the 6th floor. That was where it was. And then it moved to Shattuck Avenue for a long time, and now here. Okay. But it's at but again, feeling its way along. Right. Feeling its way along, because there's nobody was guiding the path for them. You see, they're guiding the path. And the rest of the nation came along too.
Okay.
So that's something to be very proud of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you had said that the fact that it's 74 years old is just a miracle, and it's just it says something for
says something for persistence.
Yeah.
And this place is a form of revolution, because it's where you're supposed to get information that you're not going to get anywhere else. That was the whole idea. Stuff you're not going to get anywhere else. But you got to be unified. And that doesn't mean have the same point of view on everything. Right. It just means you have those points of unity that bond you. And then you're going to have the other branches of the tree out from that trunk. You see, but that's what people here will learn a lot if they learn that, is being able to work together. This is the mother of this whole thing of community broadcasting, of public television, all of it.
How do you bring in the younger listeners?
Good question, because you bring younger listeners in by having young producers. Remembering in the early 1970s, when my generation sort of came in this wave after I arrived, that there was this big generation. So in other words, you had people from being in their 40s and 50s doing shows at KPFA to people in their 20s and 30s. And so a new generation of listeners was attracted in. The salsa programs were an example of that. People who never listened to KPFA were suddenly becoming regular listeners. And so there's going to have to be some cultural shifts involved, I'm sure, as there always is. Every place has to evolve to survive, and that includes its air sound, and it includes the people who work there. A place that is structured for that type of turnover, for that type of operation, does well. Right now, KPFA doesn't quite work like that. And so you have sometimes there are people entrenched that want to hold on to what they have, and then you have other people wanting to come in and make their contribution to the station. And either they're going to be welcomed, or they're going to just give up in frustration and go somewhere else. And so it's really up to the officialdom and the staff at this radio station to be able to welcome young people like they did traditionally during my youth. I remember Wayne Wagner, I remember Warren Van Orden, Kevin Vance, Eric Schilling, and others that were young kids coming, and myself, other kids coming into the station, learning broadcasting and being productive parts of the station's community. You see, that's how you get to the new generation, is you integrate them into the station. Mm-hmm. You make them part of the station, and believe me, once you have young people into the station, the younger artists and the younger poets will be flocking in. We proved this when we did La Raza programming. No La Raza poets had come into KPFA. We did it. We had them coming in by the droves. We had Nina Serrano, we had Avacha, we had Roberto Vargas, Alejandro Murguia, Serafín Seguia, different, that was just poets, not to mention authors, and then the many musicians that have come and gone to the radio stations with interviews or performances in this very room.
Mm-hmm. So they have to see themselves reflected here, and then sort of the others will follow.
Yes, well, it's like they say, build it and they'll come. Right. But never forgets the struggle of the people. Don't let it be just another sold out version of whatever. Always be in front, always.
That was an interview with Emiliano Echeverria, host of Cuba Canta, and Paula Burch.
Hey, this is Jazz Sawyer, host of the Jazz Intersection, airing 4 to 6 a.m. on Sundays. And we are wishing KPFA a happy 75th birthday.
Next, we will hear from Nina Serrano and Jack Foley, host of Cover to Cover, Tuesdays at 2 p.m.
So I'd like to welcome everyone to KPFA's birthday celebration. I'm Prema Jackson, and with me today is Nina Serrano, who is the host of La Raza Chronicles and one of the hosts and producers of Cover to Cover here on KPFA. Nina is not only a radio personality, but also a poet, filmmaker, writer, teacher, theater producer, and advocate of peace, social justice, human and civil rights, especially for women and the Latino American culture. I'm sure I've left something out because you have such an amazing life. I'd like to welcome you, Nina.
Thank you. I'm not currently doing all of those things because I'm now 88. So I basically retired, and I'm only active really as a poet and radio producer.
That's still pretty amazing, considering all that you've done. I mean, when I look over your accomplishments in life, I just hope that you'll also include writing your memoir.
I don't have that much interest in that. I wrote a novel, Nicaragua Way, that is based on solidarity movement of the 80s with Nicaragua. It was called Nicaragua Way. And that's as close as I've come to dealing with autobiography. I will have a new book of poems coming out this spring called Out of the Blue.
Excellent. I will look for it. And I should mention, when I'm saying why I want you to write your memoirs, that you've received international prizes for your poems and your films. For example, in poetry, you won the 2015 Penn Oakland Award and the International Embassy Award in 2012, and you were voted Best Poet by Oakland Magazine in 2010. And you were voted Best Director at the Venice International Film Festival in Italy, and in Poland at the Krakow Film Festival Award. And you also produced a documentary about the concert tours of Pete Seeger and Joan Baez and other stars of the time, which aired on PBS. And those are just
about that.
Yeah, those are just a few awards that have been given to you for your accomplishments. But let me ask you, Nina, how did you become a host producer on KPFA? When did that first start?
That started in 1963 when my husband at the time, Saul Landau, and I drove from Madison, Wisconsin in a red pickup truck with our 2 children, 2 bunk beds, a double bed, and a washing machine. And we left the children in Los Angeles and came up to San Francisco to find housing. And the first night we stayed with my sister-in-law, Beryl Landau, who was at the time an art student at UC Berkeley. And the first thing that happened in the morning was Beryl and her roommates woke up and they turned on KPFA. And I, coming from Wisconsin, which was a very conservative place, was stunned at hearing the free speech on KPFA. I couldn't believe it. And I said to them, where is this station? What is this? And they explained to me about KPFA and that it was only walking distance from the house. So I walked right over. And I asked to speak to the drama and lit person. I didn't know who to speak to, John Simon. And I told him I was interested in the station and would like to do work for them. And so he welcomed me, and so I began. That was 1963. I didn't know how to edit. At the time, the editing was all done by men in separate rooms, and it looked like they were winding up film, which is how they would edit. And only men seemed to be doing that.
Yes, back in the day when it was like cut and splice.
Yes.
What was your first show?
I think it might have been a book by Gertrude Stein that I read a whole book of hers on the air, day after day.
So there was a slot for just audiobook reading.
There was a lot of literature on KPFA.
From that, did you go right into doing the poetry show or La Raza Chronicle?
The poetry show, you mean cover to cover?
Yes.
No, I just did poetry shows when I did them, and I became very active in the Mission District in the 70s, and so I would put on a lot of the mission poets, the Latino poets, and then sometime in the 70s, I became part of a collective, a Latino collective of men and women, and we did programs on KPFA.
And that was before La Raza Chronicles.
Yes, I forgot what we called ourselves. We did it it was a weekly program. I think we did it on Saturdays for 2 hours live. We loved it.
So KPFA has really been a station for the people, for the community.
Oh, yes, always.
So how did you become involved in La Raza Chronicles?
Well, I think that was 2015. I'm forgetting her name. She was a marvelous woman and excellent at her job at KPFA, and she decided to start La Raza Chronicles, and she invited all the Latino programmers to participate in it, and we did. And then she would put the whole show together, and we would send in our segments. But then after a while, she left KPFA because she opened up a chocolate shop. Then I don't know quite how, but somehow or other, Julieta Kusnir and I wound up shepherding that program. I didn't know how to edit yet, and so Julieta would edit it. And she still edits the whole show to bring it together. She's really remarkable.
So what would stand out for you as a memorable moment in your years at KPFA since 1963?
Yes, the most memorable, I think, was meeting Antonio Ortiz, who is now the director of the station, because I didn't know how to edit. And I was kind of clueless about technical things. And then I said, would you teach me to edit? And he did. He would usually be able to teach a person to edit using SoundForge in one session. With me, it took 5, but I learned it and I still use it. Even though I've been told it's really not a good editing program and there are much better things to use, it's the one I really know. So now I edit all my own work and have since that day.
You're very active in the community. You've supported many, many, many endeavors, women's programs, many things, not only here in the States, but internationally. in regard to the Latin community. Have you found that KPFA has been helpful in enabling you to do what you do creatively, artistically, and in the community?
Oh, in every way. KPFA has been a big help in all community efforts, all outreach efforts, very involved listenership. So I don't think they listen to it just for amusement. I think they take listening to KPFA seriously, or that's how it feels. And so it's been very helpful.
It seems that in your creative life, poetry has really taken the forefront, although you have many, many other talents. So how did you begin writing poetry?
I was in Cuba, and I met Roque Dalton, who was a Salvadoran poet. And he walked me back to the hotel and then joined my family for a meal there. And we became very good friends. And we decided we'd write a play together for the TV station. And then we went across the street to the TV station, talked to them about it, and they said they were interested. It was basically the story of his life, and that's how I started writing poetry, because I wrote a poem for him in 1969, which was my first poem, and I'm going to read it to you now. I think it shows that even though I've written hundreds of poems since then, I didn't get better.
Well, maybe you were already perfect.
No, I'm afraid not. Roque Dalton before leaving to fight in El Salvador, Havana, 1969. Mass media, I adore you. With a whisper in the microphone, I touched the mass belly against mine, like on a rush hour bus, but with no sweat and no embarrassment. Don't die, I whispered in person. Only the air and revolutionary slogans hung between us. When I die, I'll wear a big smile, and with his finger painted a clown's smile on his Indian face. Don't die, the whisper beneath the call to battle. My love of man in conflict with my love for this man. Women die too. They let go their tight grip on breath and sigh to die. They say that Tanya died before Che. I saw her die in a Hollywood movie. Her blood floated in the river. I stand in the street in Havana. There are puddles here, but few consumer goods to float in them. Here the blood is stirred by the sacrifice of smiles to armed struggle, a phrase and an act. They leave one day and they are dead. Death to the known order, birth to the unknown, blood, blood, blood. The warmth of it beneath the thighs soothes the channel the baby fights and tears. And that was the first poem.
May I ask you, did he survive that war that he went to fight?
No. Can I go back and read two more poems?
Oh, of course.
Okay. I just love to read poems. March 2021, and Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca. Green, oh how I love you, green. Green hills, green fields, blue, green, yellow, green, light green and dark, every tint and shade and hue. Northern California greens after the rains. Green sprouts along the sides of the roads, buds and leaves glisten. Fresh, tender, new green, I want to eat you. Bite off a vast field newly sprouted, blossoming without blemish. I could swallow you whole, leaving only tree trunks in my hunger, aroused by this new birth of green, of winter flowering into spring, this rush of aroused appetite, this rush of bursting euphoria awakening my joy, my joy, my joy.
Beautiful. Is that from your new book?
No, that was written in March 2021, and my new book is going to come out this spring. This next is the last poem I wrote, or the latest poem I wrote. It's called Free Dump Day. What an adventure. We pulled out of the garage with the car stuffed with all the boxes and bags that were piling up in the garage since we moved in 6 years ago. Old clothes, boxes still unpacked from our move-in, and a huge black plastic bag full of unwanted giveaways, and a discreet bag of electronic waste that just didn't work anymore. The little car was packed in tight, with just enough room for us to sit in front. It was easy to spot the others en route. Pickup trucks filled to the brim with old toys, bicycle, car parts, and whatnot. Teams of people waving us in, indicating where we should go. You didn't have to get out of your car. There were more teams of people showing you where to unload your loads. What a mobilization of people, equipment, dumpsters, and trucks. All about too much stuff. That doesn't even count that most of our neighbors have to park on the street because their garages are full of stuff. Stuff is stuffing our lives. All along the highway sides, more garage units are being built to put stuff in. We're choking on stuff while others do without even a home. Free Dump Day helps free us of our societal shame. So that's my latest poem.
Beautiful. So clearly stated. Now, you've been with KPFA for a really long time. It's about 60 years this year. What would you like to see for the future of KPFA?
I think I would like to see less debates and arguments. Mostly they come in email, and they seem to be about the relationship of the station to the network. And we're always being called in to take a stand on this as listeners. And I'd like to see less of that and more listeners.
Less talk, more listening. Is there anything else?
You know what I didn't get to say, the most important part of my life, which is that I have 7 great-grandchildren and 6 grandchildren and 2 children. And that's been one of the greatest pleasures of my life. One of the things that makes this part of my life still fulfilling is my husband, Paul Richards, who helps me in everything. He's amazing. He's the publisher of my books and the keeper of my website, and helps me with all this new stuff. Of course, since the pandemic, I haven't been able to come to the station, and also that I no longer drive, and that I know how to edit so that I don't need to come into the station. And that makes it a wonderful thing in my life that I can still participate in it. I think KPFA is a blessing to the community, and its ideas should spread.
I think that you are a blessing to the community, and thank you. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your artistry and your time and all of the efforts that you have for so many years, not just with KPFA, but with so many different communities. Thank you for taking the time with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
You can join Nina Serrano on Tuesday afternoons at 2 for Cover to Cover, and Tuesday evenings at 7 for La Raza Chronicles, here on KPFA. I'm Prema Jackson. Thanks for listening.
That was an interview with Nina Serrano, host of Cover to Cover, and Prema Jackson. Next, we will hear from Luis Medina, host of Con Sabor, Saturdays at 9 p.m.
Today here at KPFA Studio, I am very pleased to introduce Luis Medina. He has been involved and connected to KPFA for many, many years. He's worked in various capacities, and I'm excited to hear more from him about these experiences and his extensive career in radio and broadcasting. Without further ado, welcome, Luis, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Paula. Really a pleasure to be here. I was born and raised in the Mission, and at the time that I was born and raised through my teenage years and into my early adult life, I became exposed to a lot of culture, a lot of music, a lot of performers were my friends. And if we go a step back just a little bit, my parents, they were immigrants. My father from Venezuela, from Caracas, my mother from Mazatlan, Mexico. They were tango dancers, and they actually became tango champions in San Francisco back in 1950, around the early 50s. I was exposed to a lot of Latin music at the house. Always the Spanish radio was on. Spanish language radio was on. I would accompany them to some of their tango performances. And when I went to San Francisco State University, I was originally going to study to be an architect under the Design and Industry department. But what happened 2 years going into that, one day I was staring at a drawing board, about to do a drawing, an architectural design, and I said, do I want to do this the rest of my life? And since I was a little kid, I was fascinated by watching people on TV, and my parents actually bought me a microphone. And they gave me a toy microphone, and I would be there pretending that, I was hosting my own TV show or whatever. And so fast forward to San Francisco State, when I made the decision to switch to broadcasting, I did it that year, and I was accepted by the Broadcast Communications Department. And not only did that happen, but my cousin Eduardo invited me to check out a radio program at a commercial radio station, Spanish language, called KBRG. And he had a collective of people, some friends were in this collective, radio collective, Venezuela Suyo. And I went there to check it out, and in the other studio, there was a guy there that was doing a salsa music show that I recognized. This guy, Arturito Santiago, used to be an MC for some of these salsa dances that were happening at that particular time. And I was checking them out, and I was going, God, that looks pretty cool. I wouldn't mind doing that. Fast forward a couple of months, and KPFA Radio opened up in San Francisco. And my cousin called me and he goes, hey, Luis, can you help me out with the music? And I said, sure. So I brought a ton of records, including salsa, Latin jazz, funk, different kinds of music, because I was into everything. Since I was 10 years old, I was listening. I was a big Beatles fan, big Motown fan, because my cousin Stella turned me on to Motown and soul. And I had open ears to everything. I really was a child of that generation from 64 on. I enjoyed the British invasion. I enjoyed what San Francisco was putting out musically. I listened to everything from jazz to Latin. But I wasn't heavily into Latin yet until I heard Santana, and then that changed everything for me. So that's my earliest memories and history.
How did KPFA come into your awareness, or how did you land here?
I was good friends with Greg Landau, who's a renowned record producer now. He's worked with Susanna Baca, worked with a ton of great artists, and he continues to do so. Anyway, when we were young men, he was connected with KPFA. And one day, we were talking, and he goes, look, I'm putting together a special at KPFA called Music of Revolutionary Cuba. Now, mind you, this was 1975, okay? And so he goes, would you like to be the voice on that and come over to KPFA and check it out? Then another opportunity came up that I could do specials on KPFA, and Charles Hamarkanian had the time opened up, and they said, well, Luis, you could come in from time to time. So I did my thing. And I did my thing for about a year, And then there was a long established program called Ahora that was on Saturdays from 2 to 6. And a musician who was also a DJ at KPFA by the name of Victor Castro, he called me and he goes, Luis, I need some help. Can you fill in every other week? And I said, great, And so I worked with Victor, I worked with Buster Gonzalez, who was the public affairs director at the time. And then when Buster left, both Philip Maldery and Chuy Varela ended up being in charge at the time, and Chuy became the person in charge of Ahora. So he made Ahora more structured. He got some different hosts, and I rotated, and I was in that rotation till about 1995. And then in 95, things changed here at KPFA, and there was what people would affectionately call the purge, and where a lot of hosts got let go. I've been consistently hosting Con Sabor since 97, and a few years later, I brought in Emiliano Echeverria to do the Roots of Salsa, which he calls Radio Cuba Canta, and we have him on the last Saturday of the month. And so we structured Con Sabor, so for all practical purposes, I'm the host and executive producer of Con Sabor.
Okay. And how has Con Sabor changed? What has been the evolution of it?
Sure. Well, on Con Sabor, we feature salsa from the classics to the latest. Okay. We also feature Latin jazz. We also feature Cuban music, which I've been featuring since the late 80s, actually on Ahora. I was one of the first people to play groups like NG La Banda, Iraquere, Los Van Van in my mix of music. And so I kept that up. I also did interviews with the artists. I've interviewed everybody from Chucho Valdez and Juan Formella, Los Van Van, to Bobby Valentin, to Ismael Miranda, to all different types of people that have been involved in the salsa world. Everybody, on both sides of the fence. Focused on also the community calendar, which is a staple of the show. We let people know what's happening. And also during all of this time, I was emceeing and DJing as well.
You've been listening to an interview with host Luis Medina here on the KPFA 75th Birthday Special Broadcast.
Hi, this is C.S. Song, co-host of Against the Grain, airing Monday through Wednesday from noon to 1, wishing KPFA a happy 75th birthday.
KPFA Radio is a community-powered, listener-supported radio station based in Berkeley, California. We are able to bring you this content through donations and support from our listeners. Please consider supporting KPFA through a donation by visiting www.kpfa.org/donate. And now let's get back to the program. Welcome back to the KPFA 75th Birthday Special Broadcast. We now continue with the second half of our interview with host Luis Medina.
We would bring who would be coming into town, into the station. We'd be interviewing them. We would be exposing their music. We would have artist profiles, that type of thing. And we would give away tons of tickets, and we would be exposing people to events that maybe perhaps they weren't aware of. And so that brought about a lot of listenership, a lot of people listening all across the board. I even had Boss Gags give me a call that he was listening from the wine country to my program. And, it's kind of crazy, but things like that did happen from time to time. And so I have traveled Europe, and I've traveled to Cuba, and I've reached out to people and been able to make connections and get recordings from there, do some interviews while I was out there. And so that has happened throughout my tenure in Con Sabor. But I wasn't the only one to do it in the San Francisco Bay Area. I want to make that clear. A lot of talented people that are my contemporaries who I have a lot of tremendous respect for have been doing that. But I've done it here consistently on KPFA. And so the KPFA audiences have been great, very sophisticated, very supportive. And we're happy to in a way, I do educate people in a way. I share my knowledge with people, and I bring about on the program. I also bring people that are writers, that are fellow broadcasters, fellow DJs from time to time, and share that information.
So really a cross-section, big cross-section.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Your show, Con Sabor, has only been a part of your involvement at KPFA.
Yes, it has.
So maybe, and it's obviously a very impactful, part of it. What other ways have you been involved in KPFA? What other roles have you played?
Okay.
Kind of talk about that.
Okay. I was music director for KPFA from 2001 to 2014, where they let me go, not because of performance issues, but because they had financial problems. And that was in 2014. But they brought me back in 2015 because nobody was handling the music business. I was handling ticket giveaways. I was handling being the liaison from the station to promoters, to performers, to record labels, because for our fund drives, before we used to have to get a thank you gifts or premiums, and I would be in charge of getting the music premiums. And so I kept those connections alive for KPFA from 2015 to 2019. And then in 2019, again, they were under a financial crunch. So they decided they didn't want to continue with the services. So I went out with a bang because I arranged, not only was I doing that, but I was, keeping KPFA connected with the music community by being in charge of the sponsorships, the music sponsorships that we had with Healdsburg Jazz Festival, with Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, with the Stern Grove Festival, with different events. And different events, I would advocate KPFA being a sponsorship. Not only that, we helped spearhead the popularity of world music in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 2000s. And beyond that, with Music of the World. And I was a fierce advocate of Music of the World. And it was on every Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to noon, once upon a time. And we had a great lineup of DJ hosts there, that very sophisticated, great people. And I fought for that program. I really did. I fought for that program, especially when it was cut down to 1 hour in 2010, which I thought was a tragedy. And that helped to kind of stem the influence or put kind of the brakes on the influence that KPFA had going on there. Not only that, world music in the San Francisco Bay Area hasn't been the same since KPFA hasn't had Music of the World in a regular daily basis. They decided eventually, after my tenure as music director, that they wanted to move move Music of the World on KPFA to Saturdays from 9 to 11. And I heard they're struggling with that. They wanted to take the show off the air, and now, because of public demand, they've been given a reprieve. And so I'm very happy to hear that. Happy to hear that. But there's a lot that I was proud of, and we were instrumental in sponsoring some major shows in world and in different types of genres, because being a music director, you have to take the responsibility of knowing the music. I wasn't a big country or bluegrass fan, but I became more well-versed, and I even have favorite artists in those genres. Folk music was a no-brainer because I was brought up with folk music. Growing up in San Francisco, listening to KSAN, listening to KMPX, listening to KPFA, actually. So that was a lot of influences that I already had inside of me. So I took the responsibility of knowing that music. I'm not saying I was an expert, but I knew who the experts were, and I would listen to them, and they would turn me on to music. And we have a lot of fantastic music programmers, always have. And the one thing that pains me, if anything, is that Pacifica Broadcasting and KPFA, well, more Pacifica Broadcasting, they have never really appreciated music programmers, which I think is a real tragedy, because we have great programmers here at KPFA and at other stations as well.
I guess it had a lifespan.
Yeah, it does. Most good things do, unfortunately.
Yeah. You've been listening to an interview with Luis Medina here on our KPFA 75th birthday special broadcast.
What would you say your legacy or imprint has been on the station?
Well, the thing about it is that when you talk about a legacy means a lot of things. At the end of the road, or during close to the end of the road here, when I decide that is, I want people to look back at my years at Con Sabor and say to themselves, that was a good program, and he did it well, and he presented it well. And he exposed us to a lot of music. And it was great to hear those interviews. And it got me through a Saturday night. And the program had quality, it had distinction, and it had style, but it also had information. And I know more about the music than I did yesterday. So, and that the combination of myself and having Emiliano Echeverria there breaking down the history of Cuban music, which isn't done anywhere. You know, this combination, what I bring to the table, what he brings to the package, that people really enjoyed it. And they enjoyed my contributions. Now, the legacy of my years with KPFA, being music director, music consultant, or whatever, is that I want people to remember that I fought for the music, okay? I had to stand up and butt heads with people, which probably cost me a few years of extra employment here at KPFA. But it's the responsibility that I took on my shoulders. KPFA, as an institution, is something that should be defended. It should be better funded. It shouldn't put the staff through having to have a fund drive every 2 months. However, it is one of the few bastions left, one of the few media outlets left that have this particular type of philosophy of giving voice to the voiceless, okay? Not many radio stations, media outlets, TV chains, streaming services are going to embrace this kind of philosophy or this kind of service. And we need to give credit to Lou Hill, who in 1949 had this crazy idea with a bunch of pacifists to put a alternative radio station together. As part of the Latin community, public radio has really been the outlet for us to express themselves, you know, because radio by nature is going to go for, like any media outlet, whether it's TV, whether it's streaming, whatever, is going to go for the most popular trends, okay? To do what I'm doing, to play the music that I'm playing, I'm defending this music. Okay, I'm defending this music. I'm presenting this music because I believe that it's still vital, it's still exciting, energizing. And during Con Sabor, I try and play the new trends and that doesn't mean I'm going to play 2 hours of reggaeton. It doesn't mean that I'm going to play 2 hours of bachata. They could listen to commercial radio stations and get that. And so, speaking about legacy, like I said, I hope people will take a look later and they said, he did it well, and that's how I would like to be remembered.
What do you envision for KPFA going forward in the future?
Well, my hopes for KPFA are the following. One, that the financial footing finally comes, that struggling for money is going to be a thing of the past. Since KPFA is married to the Pacifica Broadcasting Network, that the Pacifica Broadcasting Network finally has their business in order and be able to effectively fund these radio stations. KPFA is a resource. KPFA is the big kahuna, you could say, the big kahuna here, Pacifica Broadcasting. That doesn't mean the other radio stations don't mean squat. It just means that this radio station needs to be supported. And so in terms of seeing KPFA go forward programming-wise, we need to get younger folks in here. We need to get people that are on top of the music before they join and take over a music slot. They need to bring something to the table that is fresh, that's exciting. The traditional KPFA audience is coming to the age where they're passing away. And so we need more energy, we need more support. I applaud what KPFA is doing right now. We're trying to do the streams, we're trying to get the video happening, we're trying to make the connections with Twitter, with TikTok, with social media. I applaud that because that's where these people are connecting. But we need to be more attractive to these audiences. The thing that's different about KPFA, and I'll talk about music because, well, that's my forte.
That's what you know best.
Talk about music is that the big difference is that, sure, you could get Pandora, sure, you could get Spotify, you could get Apple Music, but they don't have any curation. They don't have anybody there that knows the music. Now, supposedly, they have AI that could do the job of announcing to your playlist. However, they don't have the knowledge of that music. They haven't gone to performances of these great artists. They haven't experienced what it is to see a live performance and you get goosebumps on your arm and you're saying to yourself, thank God I'm here. They don't have that history. They don't have that feeling. They don't discover new music. You know, when you listen to Bonnie Simmons on the air, or you listen to, Art Sato, or you listen to myself, hopefully, you're going to learn something. You're going to discover something. Sure, you're going to be listening to the music you love, but you're going to hear something new or something that you haven't heard of, and you go, wow, did I miss that?
One last question that I was thinking of is when you're out there promoting not just Con Sabor or whatever you're promoting about your work, what do you think KPFA means to the community? When you say you're from KPFA, how do you think we've impacted the broader community of listeners?
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because I have a whole series of responses. First of all, people appreciate that KPFA is on playing Latin music. So, people appreciate that. That Saturday nights, they know they could turn on 9 to 11, or they turn on to their favorite programs, whether that be Art Sato playing tango and flamenco along with jazz, or Avacha playing a mix of salsa, her poetry, jazz, whatever. They really appreciate that. Now, that being said, there are people that love KPFA. There are people that go, so much politics, can't we just have music? You know what I mean? You're going to get, or I have the whole gamut of responses. I have people that ask me, are you giving away tickets for this kind of stuff? You know what I'm saying? So you're going to have a whole variety of responses, a whole range of responses. I'm going to have people, I can't stand the politics, but I love your show and I listen all the time, but I turn it off the rest. And then there are people that absolutely love it. They said, Luis, You're part of the reason I listen to KPFA because I'm listening to Upfront and I'm listening to Letters and Politics. And Hard Knock Radio. Yeah, that Baby D, he's something else. And blah, blah, blah. And I love hip hop. And man, you guys are playing great jazz and the rock, man. And La Onda Bajita, I listen to the sound and I love that stuff. So you get that too. You'll get that too. They go, you'll get people that love KPFA and they're thanking me. They go, hey, you know what? That's a great program. That along with all this other stuff I listen to, KPFA, this is all I listen to. And then you get other people that go, yeah, I go ping pong on the radio dial, but I always have it on KPFA. And I also listen to your show. So
it resonates.
It's resonating. It resonates. But like I mentioned before, in order for KPFA to thrive, to move forward, we need to get the youth involved. We need to get younger energy and people not being afraid that they're going to lose their slot. Maybe have a way where they can collaborate together, or a way where us older folks can mentor folks and open the doors, because that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it should be.
That was an interview with Luis Medina, host of Con Sabor, and Paula Burch.
Hi, this is Brian Edwards-Tiekert. I host Upfront, which airs weekday mornings at 7 a.m., wishing all of us a very happy 75th birthday at KPFA.
For this year's 75th birthday, KPFA hosted a live event at the First Church of Christ Scientists in Berkeley. This event featured a speech from Democracy Now! Host Amy Goodman. We would now like to share snippets with you of this amazing night, starting with an introduction from Upfront host Brian Edwards-Tiekert.
It's really moving. 4 years into a pandemic to finally feel surrounded by family again. Thank you. Most of us have kept working remotely at KPFA. This is the first time I've been in a room with this many of my colleagues since COVID-19 hit. And it's incredibly exciting to see all of you. We like to start events by calling attention to the place that we're in. And first and foremost, we are in Huchun, which is the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We're also in a neighborhood. This is called Southside. It was planned and laid out by California College, which would go on to become UC Berkeley. They acquired the land, they created the neighborhood, they sold it off for development. Over a century ago, members of the university's newly founded anthropology department remarked to local newspapers how practically every time the university dug for a foundation or a pipe or a sidewalk, it turned up artifacts and shells and human remains. Alfred Kroeber, who was the department's chair at the time, estimated the age of Ohlone settlement on the campus of UC Berkeley to be more than 1,000 years. To this date, there is no plaque nor memorial on campus to acknowledge that history, much of whose evidence remains unrepatriated in the possession of the university's museums. We're also in a beautiful, beautiful space, considered one of the career masterpieces of architect Bernard Maybeck. Among the principles of design that Bernard Maybeck laid out late in his career was that he thought architecture should enhance its natural environment rather than subdue it. He also thought that the landscape should be a shared public space, not something walled off. We are also across the street from a very obvious wall. In 1967, this neighborhood around Telegraph Avenue was the heart of the counterculture in Berkeley. UC Berkeley acquired a number of homes across the street from us through eminent domain. It bulldozed them. It said its intent was to build some sports fields, but it never did. It just left a rubble-strewn lot in the middle of the neighborhood. And in 1969, neighbors pulled together and reclaimed that trash-strewn lot and built a shared space, a commons, that they called People's Park. This led to an escalating series of clashes with authorities that ended in the police killing of James Rector, the 2-week occupation of Berkeley by Governor Ronald Reagan's National Guard, and also in a park that would endure as a commons for 55 years until UC Berkeley walled it off with shipping containers and razor wire and private security. One of the great pleasures of working at a community institution with deep roots is that in my time at KPFA, I got to know station veterans who had cut their teeth covering People's Park in 1969, lugging very heavy, bulky recording equipment as they were running away from crowds of tear gas to try to get dispatches back to the station about what was going on. Another great pleasure is that as a community institution, we get to make space on the airwaves for voices that don't find that space elsewhere. For instance, for the Ohlone people who don't have as much as a plaque on campus, including for the voice of Corinna Gould, whose Segurite Land Trust just won a $27 million deal to restore a shell mound and village site in West Berkeley. And a third great pleasure is that we're able to bring Amy Goodman to the stage in this community today. Because it's a birthday, I get to tell you my origin story. I first heard about KPFA 25 years ago. I was a student back east. I was reading an issue of The Nation, which was like my touchstone to left intelligentsia. And I read an article about infighting in a left-wing radio network called Pacifica. And the point of the article was about the infighting. The only thing I noticed was left-wing radio network, and I thought, that's interesting. So when I moved out here a couple years later, one of my first stops was to a junk store. I bought a radio for $5. That was the kind of radio you had to plug in. I tuned it to 94.1 FM on KPFA, and, I became a regular listener to Democracy Now! It's easy to forget, and some of you are too young to even remember, how after September 11th, most of this country's media decided it simply wasn't acceptable to air substantial criticism of the rush to war in Afghanistan and then Iraq. There was one sole dissenting vote in Congress on the authorization for use of military force. One sole dissenting vote on the vote that put U.S. occupation troops in Afghanistan for the next 20 years. That was our representative, Barbara Lee. And the morning after she cast that vote, she was on Democracy Now! When globally coordinated protests against the looming invasion of Iraq shattered records, they got little more than a soundbite and some B-roll on the TV networks. Our radio network broadcast live from the protest stage, co-anchored by Amy Goodman. When a New York Times journalist named Chris Hedges, who shared a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the war on terror, delivered a commencement address that said our country's newly launched war in Iraq would, quote, be as damaging to our souls as it will be to our prestige, our power, and security, he got booed off the stage. He got reprimanded, by his superiors at the New York Times. But he also got invited to spend an hour on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. Amy and her incredible production team pieced together a grassroots network of community radio stations and local access TV stations and some public stations into a national broadcast platform of a type that had not existed previously. And it was a place where we could hear the voices that were literally being silenced in the supposedly free media of the world's only superpower. And so here in Berkeley, in 2003, when anti-war activists hung banners over Interstate 580, the banners urged commuters to tune to KPFA. My colleague Mitch Jeserich, he was a reporter at the time, he didn't have his own show, he remembers phoning in a report from an anti-war demonstration in Justin Herman Plaza and hearing his own voice echo back at him over all the radios being carried in the crowd of the people at the demonstration. The day after the invasion started, I came straight from the protests. More appropriately, I came straight from jail in San Francisco, where a lot of us wound up after the protests shut down the city. It was the day I was supposed to start an internship in the KPFA news department. I had never been to KPFA before. I could see it from a block away because there were people literally gathered around the entrance to the building. In a time that felt incredibly dark, in the literal darkness and the cold of Bay Area March, on the sidewalk there were people with blankets and candles gathering in the space where you could hear what's broadcast on KPFA over the speaker that sits above the entrance to our studios. And I carry that with me to this day, that sense of what it means to be an institution that's important to its community, to be a bulwark for dissent during the rush to war, to being a mass medium that operates exactly the way KPFA's founders envisioned, not by the logic of accumulating a passive audience that is then sold to advertisers, but by trying to so inspire a community that people like you freely give of your own money so that we can pay the bills. Which leads me to the final acknowledgement. All of you. Every single person who has donated or volunteered or took to the streets when KPFA needed defending. Everybody here tonight and so many thousands more have continued the tradition of the first supporters who donated to KPFA before it was even on the air to listen to. When KPFA had to give FM radio receivers to its first donors because the technology was so new, they needed a way to listen. You're part of a grassroots tradition that kept KPFA going when McCarthyism descended on American politics. Much larger institutions in media and Hollywood got pressured into purging their ranks and sanitizing their content. KPFA had no advertisers to scare away. So we kept right on going. We kept a Sovietologist, Bill Mandel, on the airwaves, even as some of our staff, including Bill Mandel, got dragged in front of congressional committees, and that's because of you. You are part of a grassroots base that built our station from an idea into a broadcaster, from one station into a network with sister stations and affiliates across the country, the kind of place that could welcome a young go-getter with a degree in anthropology and a brief career as an organic baker into the newsroom of our sister station in New York, then put her in charge of that news department, and then help her give birth to Democracy Now! So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our friend, our colleague, and many of our inspiration, Amy Goodman.
Thank you so much. And I'll bring back to my colleagues at Democracy Now! All of the support that you give to KPFA and Democracy Now! Because they are the brain trust, the organism. We work together as we have for the last 28 years to bring you really the spirit of KPFA from the beginning in 1949. Independent media not brought to you by the corporations that profit from war, but truly from the listeners, the viewers, the readers that are committed to a media that foments peace. What an honor it is to be here to celebrate the 75th anniversary of KPFA, because it is more than KPFA. It is the entire Pacifica network, and it started here with KPFA. Brian, thanks so much for that introduction and the history and the acknowledgement of where we are. And to all my colleagues, the producers at KPFA, it's such an honor to be with all of you and to be with you, the listeners, who have been there for so long, or maybe you discovered KPFA yesterday. So, 1949, Lewis Hill and his colleagues, Lewis Hill comes out of the detention camps as a conscientious objector after World War II, and he says there has to be a media outlet that is not brought to you by corporations that profit from war, but by listeners and artists and journalists. And that's how KPFA was founded. As George Gerbner, the founder of the Cultural Environment Movement, the former dean at the Annenberg School of Communications, would say, not brought to you by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell that are raising our children today. That's how KPFA was born in 1949. And KPFA really was the beginning of independent radio broadcasting in this country, 1949. 1959, we have colleagues here from KPFK in Los Angeles. KPFK began and went on the air in 5960 in Los Angeles. And then my station, WBAI, that broadcast, the debates between James Baldwin and Malcolm X on the effectiveness of nonviolent disobedience and so much more, went on the air in 1960. 1962, WBAI was the first station to publicly broadcast former FBI agent Jack Levine's expose of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. The program is followed by threats of arrests and bombings, as well as pressure from the FBI, the Justice Department, and major broadcast networks. The FBI produces a dossier of all Pacifica station staff and board members, which it gives to the Senate Internal Security Committee, the SISS, to assist in its investigation of Pacifica. A dossier on everyone who worked at the Pacifica stations at that point, which would have been WBAI, KPFK, and KPFA, I think except for 2 staff members, and they turned out to be FBI informants. But it started before that, and in the midst of that. 1960 to 1963, the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, and the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee investigated Pacifica programming for subversion. Suspected writers included Bertolt Brecht, Norman Cousins, Dorothy Healy, and W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, wrote, among many other books, The Souls of Black Folk. He was the first African-American to get a graduate degree, a PhD from Harvard University, the great Pan-Africanist intellectual, one of the co-founders of the NAACP. Yes, Pacifica has an illustrious history, holding those in power to account. So after WBAI went on the air in 1960, WPFW, Jazz and Justice Radio Today, went on the air in 1977. And before that, KPFT in Houston goes on the air in the spring of 1970 in Houston, the Petro Metro. It wasn't weeks before the Ku Klux Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. So KPFT immediately got to work, and within a few weeks, they rebuilt the transmitter, and they got back on the air. And the Klan strapped 15 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter, and they blew it up right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I thought was a good song. But so then it takes months for KPFT to go back on the air to rebuild. It was January of 1971. Arlo Guthrie came back into Houston to finish Alice's Restaurant live on the air, and KPFT has been broadcasting ever since. Now, KPFT had to push the police to investigate the double bombing of their airwaves, really push hard. And finally, they did arrest someone. He was on his way to KPFA and KPFK to blow them up as well. But they got him. And I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles. But he said it was his proudest act. And I think that's because he understood how dangerous Pacifica is, how dangerous independent media is. It allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, a Palestinian child, an Israeli grandmother, an aunt in Iraq, an uncle in Afghanistan, you might say, it sounds like my aunt, it sounds like my brother, it sounds like my uncle who I actually can't stand. But it makes it much less likely that you'll want to destroy them, because you begin to understand where they're coming from. And that understanding is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it's wielded as a weapon of war, which is why we have to take the media back. Which brings us to the current day and brings us to Gaza.
This episode is a previously aired broadcast.
Sometimes in the corporate media, it's not what exactly they say, but it's the fact that they don't bring on the people who are at the target end in our country of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, in the case of Gaza, how often on, I'm not even going to talk about Fox right now, how often on CNN and MSNBC do you actually see a Palestinian interviewed? I'm not talking about clips of those in power. I'm talking about people on the ground. And it's not only Palestinian voices. How often do you see an Israeli peace activist interviewed? Or in this country, Jewish peace activists in the corporate media? It is our job to go to where the silence is and say something. But we don't have to say it, because often where that silence is, it is loud, it is raucous, there is so much organizing going on, it just doesn't hit the corporate media radar screen. You know, Israel has a policy. Netanyahu does not allow Western journalists in Gaza. There are hundreds of journalists in Gaza. They are Palestinian. Well over 100 of them have been killed in the last 6 months. We've never seen anything like this concentration of journalists killed anywhere in the world. When CNN brings you a journalist from Tel Aviv and a journalist from Jerusalem, it's their responsibility, and we should hear from them. to tell us that they're not allowed in Gaza unless they are embedded with the Israeli military, and then, even then, it is few and far between. It is absolutely critical to hear those incredibly brave voices on the ground, the journalists who are there, even as they get thinner and thinner. Because even as they cover their community, they are a part of that community. I want to bring you some clips of Democracy Now!'s coverage over the last few months. You regulars, it'll just remind you of what you've been hearing, but you get to see it here, and I want to acknowledge my colleague, Dennis Moynihan, who's going to play some of these clips for us, who I write a column with every week called Breaking the Sound Barrier. And that's what all media should be doing, breaking the sound barrier, and I congratulate my colleagues at KPFA for doing it every single day. The world-renowned chef, Jose Andres, who founded the World Central Kitchen, WCK, who's brought in hundreds of tons of food, more than any country, into Gaza, into what is not, sometimes in the world, a catastrophe happens, like an earthquake or a flood, and people cannot be helped, and everyone's trying to get to them. But this is man-made, this is state-made famine. And it is not a famine that is looming. Gaza has descended into famine, according to all of the international aid agencies now, afraid to have their workers operate. Look at what happened with WCK, with these 7 aid workers who were killed. Chef Andres said, what's happening in Gaza after his 7 colleagues were killed, a Palestinian aid worker and 6 international humanitarians, one from Poland, a woman he worked with from Australia for the last 20 years who coordinates these food emergency shipments into countries. 3 British former military who were serving as their security, as well as a Canadian American. I heard Rishi Sunak talking about there must be a ceasefire, the conservative British Prime Minister, and about his citizens who'd been killed. I heard the Australian Prime Minister, Albanese, talking about his Australian citizen who had been killed. A Polish citizen was also killed, and a Canadian American. I did not hear Biden intone his name and talk about him. But what's most important in this, Chef Andres saying, a war against humanity itself is unfolding in Gaza, and saying the Israeli attack targeted aid workers systematically, targeted them. Those are strong words for this chef who has worked with all of these states, including Israel. You know, we were on Democracy Now! When we saw the Haaretz article, the Haaretz English article, the Israeli newspaper, that talked about exactly what happened. That, and I just read it on the air, them saying that WCK, the World Central Kitchen, had given their coordinates to the Israeli military. I mean, this was 10:30 at night. There was no one else on the road. They'd just gotten these two armored vehicles, that were more protected SUVs, these white ones, and they had one regular car. And they were just coming from coordinating the shipment from the warehouse, and they were just making their way to the house where they were staying. 3 different vehicles. They hit the first vehicle. Not clear how many were wounded in that vehicle, but it was armored, so they were able to get out of it, and they made their way to the second vehicle, and that's when they struck the second vehicle when they all got in. And then they tried, this all happened over about a mile and a half, and then they tried to get into the third vehicle. They killed every last one of them. Now Israel said that they did an investigation within a day, and they took care of things. They fired 2 soldiers, fired them. Now, Chef André said that is not enough. That is not independent. The Israeli military can't investigate itself. The same day that this happened, the U.S. authorized more weapons to Israel. And these are in exposés in the Washington Post and in other mainstream newspapers that are exposing these shipments. It was the Washington Post that also, a few weeks before, exposed that the United States had authorized 100 shipments of billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel, but each one of them went just below the threshold that Congress would have to approve them. I think 98 of the 100 shipments. The outcry, because it involves so many countries, their own citizens, might be a point of critical mass right now that could truly change policy. But one of the things that Chef André said is, let's not forget that these were 7 aid workers of about 200 who have been killed over these last months. And by the way, let's not forget, of 400 medical staff. I have never interviewed so many doctors in a concentrated period as I have in the last few months on Democracy Now! It's unbelievably brave souls who go to Gaza to help in the hospitals that are being bombed and raided one by one. And perhaps just a little bit more brave than them are the Palestinian doctors who stay there. I remember interviewing one Palestinian doctor and saying, "Why don't you leave?" And he said, "Do you think I went to medical school to desert my patients?" Within 2 weeks, we were playing that interview again to remember him. We need an honest, authentic, fair media that talks about what is happening in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel. KPFA and Pacifica Radio have covered the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel for decades, bringing you the voices of those on the ground, Israelis and Palestinians. It has been singular in its truly incredible coverage. And I want to, on the 75th anniversary of KPFA, applaud what you have done here and how you have not only educated people and those who support KPFA, allowed for that education, but let people make up their own minds based on what they hear across the political spectrum. I wanted to end by going back to World War II, as we've gone back to over and over again, these references to the Holocaust and how important they are. I wanted to go back to a brother and sister named Hans and Sophie Scholl. Hans was a medical student at the University of Munich. His sister Sophie was an undergrad. And they, together with other students and professors, put together the White Rose Collective. Hans and Sophie weren't Jewish, they were German Christians, but they thought, what can we do in the face of the Nazi atrocity? That the least they could do was inform people, they said, so that Germans could never say, we didn't know. And so they published this series of 6 pamphlets, and on one of those pamphlets were written the words, "We will not be silent." They distributed these everywhere they could. They would have them dropped from the balconies of the atrium of their school to fall on the students when they're going to classes. They would put them in alleyways. They'd get them out to marketplaces on busy market days. Hans and Sophie and one of their professors was captured by the Nazis. They were charged, they were tried, they were convicted, and they were beheaded. But that philosophy, that motto, should be the Hippocratic oath of all journalists today, should be the Hippocratic oath of us all today. We will not be silent. Democracy Now!
Check out this 75th birthday special broadcast and other birthday materials here for KPFA by visiting the KPFA website at www.kpfa.org. You can then search 75th B-Day Special. Thank you all so much for listening to this 75th birthday special broadcast. It's been a pleasure of KPFA to serve the community with an outlet for free speech and progressive news. We really look forward to bringing you another 75 years, and we want you to know that here at KPFA, we are dedicated to the ongoing fight to preserve this platform and outlet. We hope that you, the listeners, and the community will continue to support and work with KPFA to carry out this mission. Thank you all so much. And again, happy 75th birthday, KPFA. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you want to find more KPFA radio content, log on to www.kpfa.org. Also follow us on social media by visiting Facebook at KPFA 94.1 and Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at KPFA Radio. Plus, check out our KPFA TV video content on YouTube and twitch.tv at KPFA Radio. Subscribe to this podcast and stay updated to when we release episodes of shows representing the best of KPFA Radio.